Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Single best idea on a day of a funeral for a president. David Gura sent me the program for the funeral, which will occur across, I'll say 2 hours, but it may be 3 hours. It is ample. And we note Imagine, John Lennon's Imagine, being sung by Garth Brooks and Trisha Yearwood with a pianist, but also the tributes, and most importantly, the homily by the Reverend Andrew Young, always and forever of Atlanta and Georgia, and of course the service to the nations at the United Nations within the Carter administration. We decided to get perspective, and particularly farther back, on an early Jimmy Carter. It was an extraordinary story. I'm not going to go through it right now, but we are advantaged by Wendy Schiller of Brown University here on the path from Vietnam and Watergate to the 39th president.
Flash forward 10 years later, after the Kennedy's assassinated and the Johnson administration runs into trouble in Vietnam, there's just a really sour mood in the United States about the federal government and about politics in general. And at the same time, it's running head on into social movements that are transformative. Certainly the women's rights movement, certainly anti-war movement. You're starting to see the gay rights movement. So Jimmy Carter comes along sort of and sees a window. First, he's elected governor in 1970, I believe, in Georgia, reelected, and then says a window for the Democratic Party to leave that behind and meld the Southern strength of Democrats, which are still voting for the Democratic Party, the Southern strength of Democrats, with a new vision of where America could go. Right, and I think that's what he sold.
Wendy Schiller there, really interesting interview. She expanded then upon the path to how Carter lost in a landslide to Ronald Reagan, coming off the hostage crisis as well. Valuable interview, Wendy Schiller of Brown University, her textbook on civics in America, just definitive as well. My first request to our interns of who to have in honor of Jimmy Carter was Richard Haass, of course, definitive with the Council on Foreign Relations. He's at Centerview Partners. I guess his first to claim would be Northern Ireland with a Republican administration. But before that, out of Oberlin, out of Oxford, was Richard Haass, literally opening mail at the Pentagon. He was amazing today about his first days at the Pentagon. Is a very, very young, just graduated, almost student, I would say. Here is Richard Haass on Jimmy Carter.
I think it's pretty impressive. I mean, if you think about it, and I'll focus on foreign policy, it was an interesting mixture of idealism and realism. He put human rights squarely on the foreign policy agenda. Something that Reagan obviously continued, but he also negotiated arms control agreements with Soviet Union. He normalized relations with communist China. He was a realist about what the United States had to accept in terms of the nationalism and rights of others. So he returned the Panama Canal, by the way, on terms that have allowed us to use it ever since. He wasn't a pacifist, but he was a great believer in peace. He negotiated the Camp David agreements, the Egypt-Egyptian peace treaty. So I think I'll be seen as a president who got an awful lot done in 4 years.
Richard Haass, interview partners there, of course, on Mr. Carter. And, of course, what's immediate there, and something we'll address into January, and it appears after the inauguration, something on the top of the pile for President Trump, is Panama. And all of a sudden, when we look at what some people, not all people, will say was a giveaway of Panama to some entity of the Panama people, and our use of the Panama Canal really front and center for President Trump. On your commute across America, we're on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto. Of course, Good Morning Washington, 99.1, frigid Washington today for a funeral. On YouTube podcasts, this is Single Best Idea.